Has the Trump administration hit its first speed bump? Well, first misstep, first stumble. Perhaps a lot of leftists will claim that there have been a lot of stumbles since the inception of the administration a little over a week ago. But there definitely is something that has caused chaos, and this has been the foreign assistance aid freeze. Let's talk a little bit about that. The Washington Post reports an anti-HIV program in crisis as Trump aid pause sows confusion. The State Department issued a waiver for life-saving aid, but HIV clinics remain shut, and uncertainty lingers over the future of PEPFAR, the President's Emergency Program for AIDS Relief, which has saved 25 million lives. Now, that's a fair point. There has been some confusion about what funding has stopped in foreign aid and domestically, especially given the legacy media's false reporting about food stamps, Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security in their foolhardy effort at fear-mongering. But the Trump administration also bears some responsibility for this confusion. Between the sudden 90-day pause generating confusion and White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt citing $50 million being spent for condoms in Gaza, as well as entities overseas halting operations when the order clearly indicated a freeze on new funding commitments, not on existing activities, there's genuine bewilderment. South Africa's Democratic Alliance quickly called for the United States to resume PEPFAR funding. The only problem, funding was never halted, only new commitments. To be fair to the Democratic Alliance, I can see why they were confused. The Trump administration needs talented, honest folks who understand what the federal government has been up to. This was an easily preventable own goal. I don't know who informed President Trump about the executive order he signed pausing foreign aid, but PEPFAR ought to have been mentioned prominently. Also, whoever filled in the press secretary did a poor job as well. DOJ needs folks who know what they're doing, not just capable of wielding knives to cut frivolous spending. You have to understand the federal government and what we're actually doing around the world. Now, apparently last night, Secretary of State Rubio approved an emergency humanitarian waiver. United Nations aides quickly responded with gratitude. United States Secretary of State Marco Rubio has approved an emergency humanitarian waiver, which will allow people to continue accessing HIV treatment funded by the U.S. across 55 countries worldwide. More than 20 million people living with HIV, representing two-thirds of all people living with HIV receiving treatment globally, are directly supported by the President's Emergency Program for AIDS Relief, the world's leading HIV initiative. Practically the world's only global HIV initiative, that is. Not the leading, pretty much the only one. UNAIDS welcomes this waiver from the U.S. government, which ensures that millions of people living with HIV can continue to receive life-saving HIV medication during the assessment of the U.S. foreign development assistance, according to UNAIDS Executive Director Winnie Byanyima. Well, isn't she the Kenyan that was appointed to that job? I'm trying to remember, scratching my head here. The point of the story here is that they were still able to get the treatment if only people had paid attention and not panicked, because they weren't prevented from delivering that assistance in the form of antiretrovirals. Simply, new commitments were blocked. This urgent decision recognizes PEPFAR's critical role in the AIDS response and restores hope to people living with HIV. UNAIDS will continue efforts to ensure that all people living with or affected by HIV are served, and that other key components of PEPFAR's life-saving efforts, including service delivery and services for HIV prevention, care, and support for orphans and vulnerable children, are continued. Now, how exactly is UNAIDS going to do that? They're not paying for it. They have no sovereignty over any of these 55 states. They do little to nothing for those afflicted with HIV, save compile data and propose policy. That promise by UNAIDS is useless and nonsensical. Without American generosity, tens of millions will suffer because their lazy governments and the UN wasted 18 years. As if empty promises from UNAIDS were not enough, listen to what Cholera Tedros, useless COVID pimping World Health Organization, has to say on the matter. The World Health Organization said over the past year, PEPFAR and partners, including WHO, have been working on sustainability plans with countries for greater country ownership and reduced donor support up to and beyond 2030. Over the past year? Where has this ever been since the year 2003? As long as Congress has been willing to give away our money and recipients felt free to crap on the United States at every turn, UNAIDS and most recipient countries were happy to sit on their asses and take our money, suckling off the American taxpayers' teats. The idea for PEPFAR was an emergency funding to deal with a black swan event, not gifts into perpetuity. A sudden and prolonged stop to programs would hamper a managed transition and puts the lives of millions at risk, as would the United States going bankrupt, no? Now, this program does come at pretty significant cost, $6 billion a year on average. But according to UNAIDS, it's delivered high returns in the goal to end and eradicate HIV/AIDS pandemic as a public health threat by 2030. So Americans have spent over $120 billion abroad since PEPFAR's inception in 2003. It was only supposed to be a 5-year emergency effort. Hence, the past 18 years leaves you scratching your head. What have these countries done? Only a handful of countries, like Botswana and others, have made genuine efforts to assume responsibility for their own HIV programs. Others simply continue to live off the gravy train. We are on track in many countries to meet that target of ending HIV/AIDS as a global pandemic by the year 2030, said Deborah Birx. Now, she was serving as a U.S. Global AIDS Coordinator at the State Department under Barack Obama and Donald Trump. Dr. Birx. Did Joe Biden offer a COVID scam pardon for her? I don't recall one. Mark Dybul, a global health expert who helped create PEPFAR with the Bush White House, says the new administration has an opportunity to reimagine the program to include more private investment and focus less on aid and more on trade. Well, he's correct. PEPFAR has long outlived its mission by about 2 decades. It's time to grow up and take responsibility, South Africa, Namibia, Swaziland, Zimbabwe, Thailand. Now, folks, I'm not just a pundit sitting here talking about programs, reading news stories, and just ranting at the screen. No. I've actually run HIV programs. I've started them, I've run them, and led HIV programs all over Africa, including in Liberia, Botswana, Malawi, Niger, Mauritania, and Uganda. And while we've done great things together, we've also allowed partners to form bad habits like dependency and offering nothing in return for our generosity. If you crap on us and you hinder our national security and treat us like crap in the United Nations, don't expect us to pay for your problems. What say you? I understand why people are confused. The legacy media in America, those administering programs are receiving money from PEPFAR abroad, and the Trump administration all bear responsibility for the confusion here. Let's clean it up and knock the nonsense off. What say you, folks? Cheers.